helpless, burning, humiliated. Please, take it off. The words tore out of her throat, muffled by coarse burlap and heat. The sack clung to Josie's face, soaked in sweat and something sharper than sweat, something that stung her lungs each time she tried to breathe. Her arms were stretched wide and tied to two rough wooden posts driven deep into the hillside. The rope dug into her wrist. The summer sun over the San Juan Mountains showed no mercy. She heard boots in the grass behind her, slow steps, measured steps, no hurry at all. She tried to twist away, but the rope held firm. Her shoulders burned. Her fingers had gone numb long ago. Down below, the town of Silverton lay quiet, as if nothing cruel had happened that morning. Please, take it off, she whispered again, voice cracking. A man stopped behind her. She felt him kneel. She heard the soft scrape of steel leaving leather, a knife. Up on that lonely hill, everyone believed the mountain man had finally come for his offering. The Reverend called it a sacrifice, but it was really a distraction. They believed he would do what monsters do. They believed Josie Carter would never walk back into town. Wyatt Mercer didn't speak. He slid the blade under the rope at her left wrist. The fibers snapped. Her arm dropped like dead weight. Before she could react, the knife moved again, upward, toward her throat. She sucked in a ragged breath and braced for the end. Instead, the blade caught the edge of the burlap. One clean cut, light burst through. Cool air rushed over her face. The sack fell to the grass at her knees. Josie blinked against the sun. The first thing she saw was not madness, not hunger, not cruelty. She saw a weathered man in his 50s, hair long and streaked with gray, eyes steady and tired. His coat was lined with fur despite the heat. His hands were strong, but careful. He cut the second rope. Her other arm fell free. She nearly collapsed. But he caught her by the elbow and eased her down into the grass. He uncapped a dented tin canteen and held it out. Drink, he said. His voice was low, calm, almost bored. She stared at him, confused, then grabbed the canteen and swallowed. Water spilled down her chin. She coughed, then drank again. Wyatt picked up the discarded sack and brought it close to his nose. He frowned. That's chemical, he said quietly. Not rope, not dirt. Whatever they soaked it with, it was meant to fog her head, not put her to sleep for hours. Josie wiped her mouth with shaking fingers. This morning, the Reverend had told the town that the mountain man demanded payment. He spoke of missing girls. He spoke of sin. He spoke of sacrifice. Fear did the rest. They tied her up with stiff hands and frightened prayers. They dragged her up the hill before noon and left her there like livestock. Quiet, as if he might still change his mind. I didn't steal anything, she said. I know, he replied. He crouched and studied the rope still hanging from one post. That knot ain't tied by shaking hands, he said. That's freight work. Someone who loads wagons for a living. She swallowed hard. You're not what they say. He gave a faint shrug. People hunt themselves just fine, he said. They don't need me helping. A shadow passed overhead. Wyatt glanced up. A hawk circled once, then turned back toward town. He watched it disappear. They're watching, he muttered. Josie's stomach tightened. Below them, faint but clear, came the creak of wagon wheels. Wyatt stood slowly and scanned the road leading out of Silverton. If the town wanted you gone, he said, no one would come looking up here, and if they do come, it won't be to save her. She felt the truth of that settle in her chest. He took off his coat and draped it around her shoulders. The fur lining felt heavy, solid, real. For a man they called savage, he moved like someone who had worn a badge once, or something close to it. His boots were clean, his knife sharp, his eyes always measuring. He picked up the sack again and folded it carefully instead of tossing it away. Evidence, Josie watched him. Why would they drug it, she asked. So you wouldn't remember the climb, he said, or who stood closest when they tied you. The wind shifted. From town came the faint echo of a church bell. Wyatt's jaw tightened at the sound. They're moving something tonight, he said. She felt her heart start pounding again. What am I to them? She asked softly. A sacrifice. He looked at her for a long moment. You're a cover, he said. While folks stare up here, no one watches the road out. She followed his gaze down the hill. A second wagon sound drifted up, heavier this time. Her mind raced. Missing girls, freight knots, chemical sacks. Reverend Thaddeus standing in front of the church that morning, eyes calm while she begged. Wyatt stepped closer, but not too close. If we walk down there, he said evenly, they'll call it proof you were with me all along. And if I stay, she asked, you're safe for now. He said, up here, they're afraid of what they think I am. She searched his face. Are you afraid of them? She asked. He almost smiled. I'm afraid of men who talk about God and keep ledgers in the dark. For a brief moment, the hill was silent except for the wind. Then another sound reached them. Boots. More than one pair. Coming up the slope. Not rushed. Not frightened. Confident. Wyatt handed her the canteen again. Drink, he said. His eyes were no longer tired. They were sharp. If they come up this hill, he added quietly, they won't come alone. Josie looked down toward town, then back at him. Behind them lay trees and open mountain. Below them waited church bells, wagons, and men who had already decided she was guilty. Wyatt slid his knife back into its sheath and rested one hand near the handle. Calm as a fence post in dry ground. Here's the truth, he said. You walk down with me. You won't belong to that town again. The footsteps grew louder. Dust rose on the path below. Josie tightened the coat around her shoulders. On that hot Colorado hillside in the summer of 1888, with rope burns on her wrists and the taste of fear still in her mouth, she had one choice left. Stay with the monster they invented, or walk back to the men who tied the knot. So tell me this. If you were standing on that hill watching those boots climb toward you, which direction would you choose? Boots in the grass, 3 of them, steady, not hurried, not scared. Josie felt the sound before she understood it. The men climbing that hill were not coming to rescue her. They were coming to finish something. Wyatt didn't look surprised. He glanced once toward the trees behind them, measuring distance, wind, and sun the way a rancher measures weather before a storm. You can stand, he said quietly, but stay behind me. Josie pushed herself up. Her arms still trembled from the rope. The coat hung heavy on her shoulders, smelling faintly of leather and smoke. The first man crested the rise, Deputy Caldwell. His badge caught the sunlight. The second man carried a shotgun. The third had a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. Caldwell stopped 10 paces away. Well, I'll be, he said, eyes sliding from Wyatt to Josie. Looks like the beast got himself company. Wyatt didn't move his hands toward his knife. He didn't argue. He simply stood there, broad and quiet, like a fence post hammered deep. You boys lose something, Wyatt asked. Caldwell's smile never reached his eyes. We came to check if the offering did its job, he said. Town's nervous. Josie felt her stomach turn. Offering? Like she was livestock. Wyatt tilted his head slightly. She's breathing, he said. Seems your plan didn't take... The man with the shotgun shifted his grip. Caldwell's gaze hardened. She won't be, he said. Not once folks hear she was found up here with you. There it was. Not a rescue, not a check, a cleanup. Josie understood then. If she walked back into town alone, they would say the mountain man spared her for a price. If she stayed, they would say she chose him. Either way, she would never outrun the story. Wyatt's voice stayed calm. That sack smelled like medicine. He said, Doc help you with that. Caldwell blinked once, just once. That's a bold claim. That's a freight knot. Wyatt continued. Nodding toward the post, not a farmer's tie. The third man shifted uneasily. Caldwell let out a small breath. You always think you're the smartest man in the hills, he said. No, Wyatt replied, just the only one not pretending. The wind moved through the grass. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Caldwell raised his chin slightly. Here's what's going to happen, he said. Girl comes back down with us, says the mountain man tried something. We hang him by sunset. Town sleeps better. Josie's heart slammed against her ribs. Wyatt looked at her just for a second. No fear in his eyes, just calculation. And if she doesn't say it, Wyatt asked. Caldwell's smile returned. Then she disappears proper, he said, and folks assume the beast finally got hungry. The simplicity of it made Josie feel colder than the mountain air ever could. Wyatt's voice lowered. You boys sure you want to climb back down without all 3 of you walking? It wasn't a threat shouted. was math. The man with the shotgun swallowed. He had seen Wyatt's hands, seen the way he moved. Caldwell weighed the distance. 10 paces. Open ground. No cover. He spat into the dirt. This ain't over, he said. You come down that hill, Mercer, and we'll be waiting. He turned first. The other two followed. The sound of their boots faded slowly, then disappeared. Josie realized she'd been holding her breath. They're afraid of you, she said softly. Wyatt watched the path until it was empty. They're afraid of being caught, he replied. He walked to the edge of the hill and looked down at Silverton. Smoke rose from a few chimneys. Wagons moved along Main Street. From this distance, it looked peaceful. It wasn't. They're moving something tonight, he said again. And they needed you up here so no one would ask why. Josie wrapped the coat tighter. What do we do? Wyatt didn't answer right away. He studied the road that curved past the church and toward the narrow canyon leading south. Freight route. Out of sight fast. You can stay here. He said finally, I've got food, water. They won't climb again today. And you? She asked. I go down, he said. I see what they're hiding. She shook her head. They'll hang you. He gave a dry half smile. They've tried worse. There was something in the way he said it that made her believe him. Wyatt bent and picked up the burlap sack once more, folding it carefully and tucking it under his arm. Proof. He didn't waste movement. He didn't waste words. That steadiness settled something inside her. Silverton had tied her up without looking her in the eye. This man had cut her loose without asking for anything. I'm not staying, she said. He looked at her again, measuring. If you walk with me, he said, you won't belong there again. She thought about the Reverend's sermon, about Caldwell's smile, about the rope. I don't think I belong there now. She answered, for the first time. Wyatt gave a real nod. Then we moved quick. They started down the backside of the hill, away from the main path. The mountain wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of another wagon rolling through town. Heavy wheels, loaded wheels. Josie glanced back once at the posts still standing in the grass. An hour ago, she had been tied to them, waiting for a monster. Now she was walking beside one that the town had invented. Halfway down the slope, Wyatt slowed. If things turn bad, he said quietly, you don't run toward town, you run toward the river. Follow it north. You'll find my cabin. You expect things to turn bad? She asked. He looked ahead toward Silverton. I expect men who lie in church to lie everywhere else. They continued downward. The church bell rang once, not for prayer, for gathering. Wyatt's jaw tightened. They're setting the stage, he said. Josie felt the weight of what lay ahead. Silverton would not welcome her. It would judge. It would whisper. It would aim. And somewhere in that town, girls were missing, wagons were moving, ledgers were being written. As they reached the tree line, Wyatt stopped one last time. After today, he said, nothing goes back to normal. Josie nodded. Behind them. The mountain stood quiet. Ahead of them. Silverton waited. If you've made it this far, you're walking down that hill with them. Go ahead and subscribe if you want to hear what really waits in that church and on that freight road. Pour yourself a cup of tea, settle in, and tell me what time it is, where you are, and where you're listening from. I read every one of those. Now let's see what Silverton is hiding before nightfall. Wyatt and Josie stepped out from the trees onto the edge of town, just as men began drifting toward the square. Store doors opened. Curtains shifted. Folks pretended it was just another hot afternoon. It wasn't. Wyatt walked straight down Main Street, not fast, not slow, just steady. Josie kept half a step behind him, coat wrapped tight, hat pulled low to shadow her face. A few people recognized her anyway. Eyes widened. Whispers started like dry grass catching spark. She's alive. She was up there. With him. Wyatt didn't look left or right. That bothered them more than if he had. Deputy Caldwell stood near the water trough, thumbs hooked in his belt, like he had been expecting this walk all along. Well now, Caldwell called out, voice carrying easy. Look what wandered down. Wyatt stopped 10 feet away. Josie felt every stare in the street pressing into her back. She didn't wander. Wyatt said, You tied her. A murmur rolled through the onlookers. Caldwell shrugged. Town was scared. You were organized, Wyatt replied. That's different. The heat hung thick. A wagon rolled past at the far end of the street. Canvas pulled tight over the back. Two men walked beside it, heads down. Wyatt's eyes tracked it for just a second. Then he looked back at Caldwell. Freight's leaving early today, he said. Caldwell's jaw tightened. You always this curious, he asked, or just when it suits you? Wyatt stepped closer. I'm curious about girls who vanish, he said, in sacks that smell like a doctor's bag. A few heads turned toward the clinic across the street. Caldwell forced a chuckle. You planning to accuse the whole town? He said, not the whole town. Wyatt answered, just the men who keep ledgers. That word landed, ledger. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't explained, but men who had something to hide always hear certain words louder than others. Josie saw it happen. Just a flicker in Caldwell's eyes. Behind him, two more deputies stepped out from the jailhouse porch. Shotguns rested easy in their hands, not aimed, yet. Wyatt noticed. He shifted his weight slightly, putting himself between Josie and the barrels without making a show of it. Here's how this goes, Caldwell said. Voice lower. Now, you head back up that hill. Girl stays. We call it confusion. Everyone forgets. Josie felt the old fear creeping up her spine. Forget. Like the missing girls had been forgotten. Wyatt didn't blink. She comes with me, he said calmly, or we all walk to that church together and ask your reverend some questions. The air changed. A few men in the crowd exchanged looks. Reverend Thaddeus had not yet stepped outside. He was watching from somewhere. Wyatt knew it. Caldwell gave a small nod toward the deputies. The one on the left raised his shotgun a few inches higher. Careful, Caldwell said softly. Town's seen enough trouble. Wyatt's voice dropped just as soft. You hang me without proof, he said. And folks start asking why you're in such a hurry. That was the part Caldwell didn't like. Hurry. It meant something was moving. On cue, the heavy wagon at the end of the street hit a rut and jolted hard. A faint sound came from beneath the canvas. Not crates, not tools. A muffled thump. Josie heard it. So did two women standing near the mercantile. They looked at each other. Wyatt turned his head slightly. Cargo don't usually breathe. He said. The words were simple, plain. They cut deeper than shouting ever could. Caldwell's calm cracked for half a second. Search that wagon, Wyatt said, loud enough for the street to hear. Right now. Silence. No one moved. The two deputies hesitated. This was the moment. Fear versus curiosity. Order versus doubt. Caldwell stepped forward. You don't give orders here, he said. Wyatt held his ground. I used to, he replied. The statement hung there. Not a boast, a memory. Caldwell squinted. Used to, he repeated. That badge is long gone. Truth ain't, Wyatt said. Josie watched the crowd shift. Men who had been ready to watch a hanging now looked unsure. Mothers looked toward that wagon again. The canvas twitched, just barely. Wyatt took one more step. If you've got nothing to hide, he said evenly, let them look. Caldwell's hand drifted toward his pistol. One of the deputies glanced at the wagon, then at the townsfolk gathering thicker by the second. Too many witnesses, too many eyes. Caldwell made a choice. Move that wagon. He snapped toward the driver. Now. The driver flicked the reins hard. The horses lunged. Wyatt reacted faster than anyone expected. He stepped into the street and grabbed the bridle of the nearest horse, yanking it sideways with a strength that didn't look like it belonged to a man past 50. The wagon jerked to a halt. The canvas shifted again, and this time the sound beneath it was clear, a soft cry, not loud, but real. The entire street froze. Josie felt her pulse in her ears. Caldwell drew his pistol. Let go, he ordered. Wyatt didn't let go. His eyes locked onto Caldwell's. Go ahead, he said quietly. Shoot in front of the whole town. The wind carried the smell of dust and sweat and something else. Fear. From more than one side, a woman in the crowd stepped forward. That ain't Flower, she said, voice trembling. Flower don't cry. Murmurs spread. Caldwell's face went pale, then hard. Open it, Wyatt said. No one moved. Not yet. And somewhere inside the church, a door creaked open. Because if that wagon was opened in front of everyone, Silverton would never be the same again. The canvas moved again, Not wind, not loose rope. It moved from the inside. Wyatt kept one hand tight on the bridle, the other hanging loose near his side. He didn't draw, didn't rush. He just stood there like a gate that wasn't about to open. Caldwell's pistol was steady now. "You're making a mistake," he said. Wyatt's eyes never left his. "Mistake was tying her to a post," he replied. "This is just daylight." A few men in the crowd shifted forward, not brave yet, just curious. That's how most reckonings begin. Josie stepped to the side of the wagon. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might give her away. She reached up slowly. Caldwell snapped his head toward her. "Don't," he warned. She froze. Wyatt spoke without looking at her. Easy. His voice carried calm, not fear. That calm spread. People were listening to him now. One of the older ranchers in town, a man named Halverson, cleared his throat. "Let the girl lift it," he said. "If it's flour, no harm done." Caldwell's jaw clenched, and for the first time, the street wasn't fully his. Josie grabbed the edge of the canvas and pulled it back. The smell hit first. Not grain, not tools. Sweat. Stale air. Fear. 3 girls sat cramped in the back, wrists bound, mouths gagged. One of them couldn't have been more than 16. The smallest one blinked in the sunlight like she had forgotten what it looked like. A sound moved through the crowd, low and ugly. Not shock, recognition. They knew those faces. Wyatt released the bridle slowly. Caldwell stepped back without meaning to. "No," he said. "That ain't what you think." Wyatt finally turned toward him fully. "Then explain it," he said. The church door across the street opened wide. Reverend Thaddeus stepped out into the sunlight. Clean collar, calm face, hands folded like he had just finished prayer. He walked forward at an even pace, eyes scanning the wagon, the girls, the crowd. "What's this disturbance?" he asked gently. His voice was smooth, warm, the kind that made people lower their guard without knowing why. Caldwell swallowed. "Misunderstanding," he muttered. Reverend Thaddeus looked at Wyatt. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "you've brought chaos into our town again, like this had happened before." Wyatt studied him. "You were in a hurry," Wyatt said. "Why?" The Reverend's expression didn't change. "These girls," he said, nodding toward the wagon, "were being sent to work in a mining camp. Honest employment. Safer than wandering the streets." One of the girls tried to cry out through her gag. Josie stepped up and pulled the cloth from her mouth. "They told us we'd get paid." The girl gasped. "Then they locked us in." The crowd shifted harder now. This wasn't rumor. This was flesh and bone. The Reverend kept his tone steady. "Fear clouds judgment," he said. "We are helping them, providing structure, protection." Wyatt's eyes narrowed. "Protection don't usually need rope," he said. A few men nodded without realizing it. The Reverend's gaze flicked to Caldwell. Just a flicker. Enough. Wyatt saw it. There was a line running through this town, and it ran straight from the church steps to the jailhouse porch. Josie stepped beside Wyatt now, not behind him. "You told them," he demanded, "a sacrifice," she said, voice shaking but loud enough. "You said the mountain wanted payment." Murmurs rose again. The Reverend tilted his head slightly. "Metaphor," he said softly. "People hear what they fear." Wyatt let out a quiet breath. That sack smelled like something from a clinic, he said. "Doc's medicine." Now the clinic door across the street creaked open, just a crack. Too many doors opening today. Too many men stepping into sunlight at the wrong moment. The Reverend spread his hands. "You accuse without proof." Wyatt reached into his coat and pulled out the folded burlap sack. He held it up. "Proof starts small," he said. He turned it so the crowd could see the dark stains near the inside seam. "You tell them you're saving their daughters." Wyatt continued. "But you're shipping them out like ore." Silence. The kind that feels heavy. The Reverend's eyes cooled. "You have always resented this town," he said. "You left it once. I left because of men like you." Wyatt replied. That one landed harder than shouting. Caldwell shifted his pistol again. The deputies behind him looked uncertain now. Halverson stepped forward, slow but solid. "Untie the rest," he said, nodding toward the wagon. "All of them." One deputy hesitated. Then, slowly, he lowered his shotgun. That was all it took. 2 women rushed forward and helped the girls down from the wagon. The street was no longer controlled. It was unraveling. Reverend Thaddeus watched it happen with a face that barely changed. but his eyes had gone cold. He leaned slightly toward Caldwell and said something too low for the crowd to hear. Wyatt saw it. He didn't hear the words. He didn't need to. Men who lose control don't surrender. They change tactics. Wyatt stepped closer to the church steps. "If you've got nothing to hide," he said evenly, "we'll take a look inside." The Reverend smiled again. "Of course," he said. "God's house is always open." It sounded welcoming. It wasn't. Josie felt it in her bones. The doors behind the Reverend stood wide. Dark inside. Cool. Quiet. Too quiet. Wyatt glanced once at Josie. "Stay close," he said softly. The crowd began to move, not as a mob, as witnesses. The Reverend stepped aside, gesturing politely toward the entrance. Wyatt walked past him first. As he crossed the threshold, he felt it. Not faith, not peace, something underneath the floorboards, something hidden. And as the church doors swung shut behind them with a heavy wooden thud, Wyatt understood one thing clear as day. Whatever was buried in that building was not meant to see sunlight. The church doors closed behind them with a heavy wooden thud. The sound echoed longer than it should have. Inside, the air felt cooler, but not clean. It carried the faint scent of candle wax, old wood, and something else beneath it, something damp. Wyatt paused just inside the entrance and let his eyes adjust. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass, casting soft colors across the pews. Townsfolk lingered near the doorway, unsure whether to sit, stand, or leave. Reverend Thaddeus walked calmly down the center aisle. "You see," he said gently, spreading his hands, "nothing here but faith." Wyatt didn't answer. He moved slowly, boots quiet against the wooden floor. He looked at the altar, the pulpit, the hymn books stacked neatly in their racks. Josie stayed close enough to hear his breathing. "Feels wrong," she whispered. "It is," Wyatt replied, "near the front pew." Wyatt stopped. He didn't look at the Reverend. He looked at the floor. Then he shifted his weight and pressed his boot heel down hard. The board gave the slightest hollow sound, not loud, but different. Wyatt crouched. Caldwell stepped forward. "You're not tearing up church property," he snapped. Wyatt ran his hand along the seam between two planks. "They built this place solid," he said calmly. "Except here." Reverend Thaddeus kept his voice smooth. "You insult the house of God." Wyatt looked up at him. "God don't usually need trap doors." A ripple went through the crowd. One of the older men moved closer. "You saying there's a cellar?" he asked. Wyatt nodded slightly. "Not for potatoes." He stood and walked toward the pulpit instead. "If a man hides something, he hides it where no one dares to search. Right in plain sight." Wyatt stepped up to the pulpit and opened the large Bible resting on top. Reverend Thaddeus took one sharp step forward. "That is sacred," he said. Wyatt didn't rush. He flipped a few pages. Then he paused. The book felt too light. He closed it halfway and ran his thumb along the edge. The pages were thicker in the middle. He pressed. The paper gave way. Inside, carved neatly into the hollowed center, was a small leather-bound notebook. The church went silent. Wyatt lifted it out slowly. Reverend Thaddeus didn't move this time. His face remained calm. Too calm. Wyatt opened the notebook. Names, dates, amounts. Next to each name, a figure. Beside some, a note. Delivered, paid in full. Josie felt the blood drain from her face. Her own name sat near the bottom of the page, beside it. An amount higher than she had ever seen in her life. Deposit received. A few people in the crowd leaned closer. Halverson removed his hat slowly. "What is that?" he asked. Wyatt held the notebook high enough for them to see. "That's not scripture." He said, "That's business." The Reverend finally spoke again, voice still controlled. "Those are donations," Betty said. "Support for relocation, for work." "Work where?" Wyatt asked quietly. No one answered. The silence felt heavier now. Wyatt flipped a few more pages. At the top of one entry was a name that made him stop. He didn't react at first, and he just stared. Then he turned the book slightly, so only Josie could see. The name was familiar to him. Too familiar. His jaw tightened. Caldwell shifted uneasily. "This proves nothing," the Reverend said. "You twist numbers into accusations." Wyatt closed the notebook. "It proves motive," he said. He stepped down from the pulpit. And it proves you needed her gone, he added, nodding toward Josie. Before tonight. A low murmur rolled through the pews. Tonight. There was still something planned. Wyatt glanced back at the hollow Bible. He knew men like Thaddeus. They didn't keep only one record. This was the list for show. There would be another. The real one. Somewhere safer. He walked back to the loose floorboard near the front pew and dropped to one knee. This time he didn't ask permission. He wedged his knife into the seam and pried upward. The plank lifted with a groan. Dust rose into the air. Underneath was darkness. Cool air drifted up from below. And with it, a sound, faint, not as clear as the wagon had been. But there. A soft scrape like movement. Josie's hand found Wyatt's shoulder without thinking. He looked up at her briefly. You hear it? He asked. She nodded. From the doorway. Someone whispered a prayer. Reverend Thaddeus stepped backward slowly. You are trespassing, he said. But the strength had left his voice. Wyatt stood and handed the notebook to Halverson. Hold on to that, he said. Don't let it out of your sight. Then he turned back to the opening in the floor. If there's nothing down there, he said evenly, you've got nothing to fear. No one moved to stop him now. Not Caldwell. Not the deputies. The power in the room had shifted. Wyatt picked up a nearby lantern, lit it from a candle, and lowered it into the darkness. The light revealed a narrow wooden ladder leading down. The air smelled stale, wrong. He looked over his shoulder at Josie. Stay up here, he said. She shook her head. He almost argued. Almost. But then he saw the look in her eyes. She had already been tied to a post and left for dead. She wasn't staying behind again. Wyatt stepped onto the ladder. The wood creaked under his weight. Each rung carried him deeper into shadow. And halfway down, before his boots even touched the dirt floor below, he heard it clearly. Not one voice, more than one, breathing, and chains. The air down there felt wrong, not just stale, used. Wyatt's boots touched dirt at the bottom of the ladder. The lantern light swung in his hand, throwing long shadows against rough stone walls. The space wasn't large, but it had been made on purpose. Reinforced beams, iron rings bolted into timber. This was no root cellar. This was storage. Josie came down behind him despite his warning. Her shoes hit the ground softly. The lantern flame steadied. 3 girls sat against the far wall, wrists shackled to iron rings. 2 more huddled near a stack of crates. All of them looked up at the light like it might disappear if they blinked. One of them recognized Josie. You're alive, she whispered. Josie's throat tightened. Wyatt knelt beside the nearest chain and examined the lock. Solid iron. New, not something pulled from an old barn. Above them, the muffled sound of raised voices drifted through the floorboards. The town was arguing now. Good. Keys will be upstairs, Wyatt said quietly. He stood and scanned the cellar. Crates lined one wall. Not food, not tools. Paper labels were nailed to the side of each crate. Numbers, initials, dates, shipment marks. Josie stepped closer to one and ran her fingers along the wood. They were packing us like freight, she said. Wyatt's jaw tightened. He moved to the ladder. I'm going up, he said. Stay behind me. They climbed back into the church. The moment Wyatt's head rose above the floorboards, he felt the shift. Smoke. Thin at first, then thicker. Someone had overturned oil lamps near the back pews. Flames licked along dry wood. The Reverend was gone. So was Caldwell. Only a handful of townsfolk remained inside, staring in shock as fire crawled up the curtains. They're burning it, Josie said. Wyatt pulled himself fully out of the hole and grabbed the edge of the loose plank. Get water. Someone shouted. Too late. The summer air was dry. The wood older than most of the men standing there. The fire moved fast. Wyatt looked toward the doors, closed, barred from the outside. Caldwell hadn't planned to argue. He had planned to erase. Smoke thickened near the ceiling. Josie coughed. The girls, she said, panic rising. They're still down there. Wyatt didn't hesitate. He grabbed the long rope attached to the church bell near the entrance. He yanked hard. The bell roared above them, loud and wild. Not for prayer this time, but for alarm. Then he tied the rope around the base of the heavy wooden pew closest to the doors. What are you doing? Halverson shouted through smoke. Making an exit, Wyatt answered. He hooked the rope, braced his boots, and tried once, just enough to prove it could move. Then he looked back through the smoke and barked, not begging, just ordering. "Help me." The pew groaned. Flames spread across the back wall. 3 men rushed in at once, coughing, eyes wet, hands ready. 3 of them grabbed the rope. Together they dragged the pew across the floor and slammed it against the double doors. Once, twice. On the 3rd hit, the bar outside cracked loose. Light burst in as the doors flew open. Fresh air rushed through the church, feeding the flames higher. Wyatt turned back to the open hole in the floor. "You get them up," he told Josie. She didn't argue. She dropped back down the ladder into smoke and heat. Below, the cellar was already filling with haze. The girls were coughing now, eyes wide with terror. Josie moved fast. She grabbed a hairpin from her dress and knelt by the nearest lock. Her hand shook once, then steadied. She had learned long ago how to open what was meant to hold her. The first lock clicked. The girl pulled free. "Help the others," Josie said. Above them, boots pounded across the church floor as townsfolk scrambled out. Wyatt stood at the edge of the opening, lowering the lantern down again. "Move," he called. One at a time. The second lock gave, then the third. Chains hit dirt. Smoke poured down the ladder shaft now. One of the youngest girls stumbled. Josie caught her. "You're getting out," she said firmly. One by one they climbed. Wyatt pulled each of them up by the arm, strong despite the smoke clawing at his lungs. Flames had reached the pulpit. The hollowed Bible burned first. Paper curled into black ash. Outside, people screamed for water buckets, but no one dared step back inside. Until the last girl reached the top, Josie climbed out next, coughing hard. Wyatt followed, hauling himself through just as a beam from the ceiling cracked and fell where he had been standing seconds earlier. They staggered through the open doors into the street. The church behind them roared now, flames bursting through stained glass. Shards fell like colored rain onto the dirt. The rescued girls huddled together near the well. Mothers rushed forward. Fathers stood frozen, and across the street, near the edge of town, Caldwell sat on his horse. Beside him, Reverend Thaddeus mounted calmly. They were not panicking. They were leaving. Wyatt wiped soot from his eyes and saw it clearly. This fire was never meant to kill just a few girls. It was meant to destroy every record, every ledger, every plank hiding a cellar. Josie followed his gaze. "They're running," she said. Wyatt nodded slowly. He didn't look at the burning church again. He looked at the narrow road leading toward the mountain pass. "They won't get far," he said. Behind them, the church roof collapsed inward with a thunderous crash. Smoke rose into the Colorado sky like a signal. And as Caldwell and the Reverend spurred their horses toward the canyon road, Wyatt understood something simple and sharp. This was no longer about proof. It was about pursuit. The church burned like a warning the whole valley could read. Folks poured into the street in nightshirts and work boots, carrying buckets that wouldn't matter. The bell rope still swung loose in the doorway, and smoke rolled over Main Street like a low storm. Wyatt stood in the dirt with soot on his face and the lantern still in his hand, watching Caldwell and Reverend Thaddeus ride hard toward the canyon road. Josie stepped beside him, coughing, eyes stinging, but upright. Behind them, the rescued girls huddled near the well, shaken and alive. Few mothers pulled them close. Few fathers stood frozen, like their minds were trying to catch up to what their hands had helped do. Wyatt didn't give the crowd a speech. He didn't have to. The truth was standing right there. Wrists raw, hair tangled, faces pale. Halverson lifted the little leather notebook that Wyatt had handed him earlier, holding it high like a courtroom exhibit. "This came out of the Bible," he said. Voice rough. Names and money. The murmuring turned into something sharper. Not fear. Anger. A man near the saloon spat into the dust. "My girl's been gone 3 weeks, he said. "You telling me the church had her chained under the floor?" A woman whispered a prayer that sounded more like a curse. Josie saw the shift happen across the town, like a line of dominoes tipping. Folks who had pointed fingers at Wyatt now stared at the road where the Reverend had fled. Wyatt turned toward the jailhouse porch. 2 deputies still stood there, faces tight, shotguns in hand. They were waiting for orders that weren't coming anymore. Wyatt spoke just loud enough to carry. You saw the wagon, he said. You heard the cries. You still want to stand with them. One deputy swallowed and lowered his shotgun by a few inches. The other did not. That second one was still Caldwell's man. He stepped off the porch, gun coming up. Wyatt's hand moved toward his knife, then stopped. He didn't want a knife fight in front of frightened girls. Not here. Not now. The deputy aimed at Wyatt's chest. Josie felt her stomach drop. Then the town did something it hadn't done all day. It moved. Halverson stepped in front of Wyatt, slow but solid, like a man who'd spent his life saying no to storms. Another rancher grabbed the deputy's barrel and shoved it sideways. A third man swung a fist, quick and ugly. The gun fired into the air. Not into Wyatt. The sound cracked down the street. Pigeons exploded from a rooftop. The deputy stumbled back, shocked that the town had touched him at all. Wyatt didn't pile on. He just watched, calm and steady. That calm was contagious. It kept the moment from turning into a stampede. The deputy tried to raise the gun again. This time, Josie saw the mayor, Silverton, step out of his office like a man stepping into his own shame. Mayor Pritchard was small and pale, the kind of man who loved papers and hated noise. He looked at the burning church, then at the girls by the well, then at the deputy with the shotgun. His hands shook. Then he did something that surprised even Wyatt. He reached under his desk and pulled out an old shotgun, the kind towns kept for wolves and late-night trouble. He walked into the street and tossed it toward Wyatt. Wyatt caught it clean. No show, no smile, just competence. The deputy froze. He hadn't expected the mayor to choose a side. Wyatt held the shotgun low, not aimed. You put that gun down, Wyatt said, or you're going to stand alone. The deputy looked around. No one was with him now. Not the ranchers, not the shopkeepers, not the mothers holding their daughters. He let the shotgun slip from his hands and hit the dirt. The sound of it landing was quieter than the church crackling behind them, but it carried just as far. Josie breathed out slowly. Wyatt turned to the crowd. Caldwell and Thaddeus are running, he said. They're not running empty. A man near the mercantile spoke up. They took the payroll wagon, he said. I saw it. Gold from the mine office. They hitched fast. That mattered. Men who might hesitate to chase a preacher would chase a wagon of gold. Wyatt knew that. He didn't like it, but he knew it. He nodded once. Then you've got your reason, he said. He walked toward the well and looked at the girls. One of them held her wrists like they still had chains on them. Wyatt lowered his voice. You're safe now, he said. Stay by the crowd. Don't go anywhere alone. The girl nodded, eyes wide. Josie stepped closer to Wyatt. You're going after them, she said. Wyatt's gaze was already on the canyon road. I don't leave men like that behind me, he said. As he spoke, a sharp crack echoed from the edge of town. A rifle shot, not close, but close enough. Wyatt flinched as something hot tore across his right shoulder. More of a sting than a punch. He grunted and steadied himself. Josie's hand flew up to his sleeve. Blood showed through the soot. Not pouring, but real. Wyatt didn't sit down. He didn't curse. He just looked toward the ridge where the shot came from. Caldwell's last favor to his friends, a parting reminder. Wyatt tightened his jaw. Josie swallowed hard. You're hurt. I'm still standing, he said. He handed the shotgun back to the mayor. Keep order, he said. Lock your deputies in the jail if you have to. Mayor Pritchard nodded like a man grateful for instructions. Wyatt walked to a hitching rail and grabbed the reins of a sturdy bay horse. Halverson stepped in close and handed Josie a light ranch rifle from his own saddle rack. No speech, no questions, just a grim nod that said, Bring the truth back. The horse tossed its head, nervous from smoke and shouting. Wyatt soothed it with one firm stroke along the neck. Josie climbed onto a smaller mare beside him, not graceful, but determined. A rancher called out, You need men. Wyatt looked at the crowd. He saw anger. He saw regret. He saw fear trying to hide behind pride. You keep your families safe, he said. I'll bring the rest back. He nudged his horse forward. Josie stayed tight at his side. They rode through smoke and ash toward the canyon road, the church fire glowing behind them like a dying sun. Ahead, the trail narrowed, and in the distance, just before the first bend, Josie saw it. A wagon moving fast, canvas tight, a glint of metal in the late light. Wyatt leaned forward, eyes sharp. Hold on, he said. 'Cause if that wagon tips on the pass, the truth's going to spill out with the gold. The canyon road narrowed fast, loose gravel, sharp turns, a long drop to the river below that didn't forgive mistakes. Wyatt leaned low over his horse's neck, one hand tight on the reins, the other pressed hard against his wounded shoulder. Blood had soaked through his sleeve, but he rode like pain was just another bill that could wait. Josie kept pace beside him. She wasn't the best rider in Silverton, but she was stubborn, and sometimes that counted more. Up ahead, the wagon bounced hard over ruts, iron rims striking stone. 2 horses pulled it hard. Caldwell rode behind it. Reverend Thaddeus held the reins. They weren't slowing down. They'll wreck it. Josie called over the wind. Not before the pass, Wyatt answered. The pass was narrow. One side cliff, one side empty sky, a place where men made bad decisions when cornered. Wyatt urged his horse forward. Another rifle shot cracked from the wagon. The bullet struck dirt near his horse's front hooves. He didn't flinch. He had heard worse sounds in his life. He just angled slightly to the left, forcing the wagon toward the cliff side of the road. Caldwell looked back and fired again. This time the shot went wide. Wyatt's voice cut through the wind. "You can't outrun truth, Caldwell." The deputy shouted something back, but it was lost to distance and dust. They rounded a bend and the pass opened ahead of them. Narrow. Tight. No room for mistakes. Reverend Thaddeus glanced over his shoulder. For the first time, his calm cracked. He snapped the reins hard. The wagon lurched. One wheel lifted, then slammed back down. Gold bars clinked inside, heavy and loud. Josie saw it. The wagon wasn't just carrying payroll. It was carrying enough to buy silence. Wyatt drew closer. Close enough now to see the Reverend's face clearly. "Pull it up," Wyatt shouted. "You've got nowhere to go." Thaddeus turned his head, eyes cold and bright. "You always had to interfere," he called back. Even back then. Wyatt's grip tightened on the reins. Back then, the words hit like a thrown stone. Caldwell looked confused. "What's he talking about?" The deputy yelled. Thaddeus didn't look at him. He looked at Wyatt. "Your wife saw too much that night by the river," he said calmly. And she wouldn't look away. The canyon felt suddenly smaller. The sound of hooves faded under the roar inside Wyatt's head. He remembered lantern light by water, a warning he had given, a shot from the dark. He had blamed outlaws, blamed drifters, blamed himself. Thaddeus smiled thinly. "She stumbled onto what I was building," he said. "Same way you just did." For a second, Wyatt almost lost the reins. Pain in his shoulder didn't matter anymore. This was older, deeper. Josie saw the change in him. "Wyatt," she said sharply. The wagon hit another rut. This time the rear wheel cracked. The wagon tilted toward the cliff. Caldwell swore and grabbed for balance. Gold shifted inside with a heavy slide. Wyatt forced himself back to the present. Dead men didn't answer questions. Alive ones did. He rode hard to the wagon's left side. "Stop," he shouted, "or you go over." Thaddeus reached under the bench and pulled a small pistol. He didn't aim at Wyatt. He aimed at Josie. Wyatt saw it a heartbeat too late. Down. He shouted. The shot fired. Josie ducked low against her horse's neck. The bullet tore through the air above her hat. She didn't scream. She reached instead. Her rifle had been slung across her back since town. She pulled it forward, braced it against her saddle horn, and fired once, not at a man. At the ground beside the lead horse, the crack and flying gravel spooked it, and the wagon drifted toward the edge. The lead horse jerked sideways. The wagon veered. One wheel slid off the edge. Wood groaned. Caldwell leaped clear, rolling across the gravel. Thaddeus clung to the bench with one hand and the gold sack with the other. For a moment, the wagon hung there, half on the road, half over nothing. Gold bars spilled from the back and clattered down the cliff face, flashing in the sun before disappearing into the river below. Wyatt reined in hard. Dust swirled around them. "Let it go," Wyatt called to the Reverend. "You can still climb out." Thaddeus looked at the gold, then at Wyatt. There was no prayer in his eyes now, only hunger. "You think this town would have survived without me?" he spat. "Men need direction. Fear keeps them straight. Fear kept you paid." Wyatt answered. The wagon shifted again. The remaining wheel cracked under the strain. Thaddeus tried to pull himself toward the road while still clutching a heavy sack of gold. The weight dragged him sideways. For one split second, he could have let go of the money. He didn't. The wood beneath him splintered. The wagon tipped fully over the edge. Thaddeus vanished with it. The sound of wood breaking echoed down the canyon, then nothing but wind. Caldwell staggered to his feet, staring over the cliff, pale as ash. Wyatt dismounted slowly despite his shoulder. He walked toward the edge and looked down. Broken wagon, scattered gold. A dark shape lay far below among the rocks. Josie rode up beside him, breathing hard. Caldwell dropped his pistol into the dust. It wasn't supposed to go like this, he muttered. Wyatt didn't look at him. It never does, he said quietly. The wind carried the faint sound of church bells from town, ringing wild in the distance. Josie glanced back toward Silverton. The smoke from the burned church still rose into the sky. It's over, she said. Wyatt kept his eyes on the canyon floor. No, he replied. Now the town has to decide what it is without him. The wind kept moving through that canyon like it wanted to sweep the whole day clean. Wyatt stood at the edge a moment longer, then turned his horse back toward Silverton. Josie rode beside him, quiet now, not because she had nothing to say, but because some truths land too heavy for talk. Behind them, the broken wagon and the spilled gold disappeared around the bend, swallowed by rock and distance ahead of them. The valley opened, and the smoke from the burned church still rose like a dark finger pointing at the sky. When they reached town, the street looked different, not cleaner, just more honest. Men who had shouted loudest that morning now stared at their boots. Women who had prayed for a sacrifice now held rescued girls close, as if holding tighter could undo hours of fear. Wyatt didn't take a victory lap. He didn't need applause. He simply walked the girls toward safe houses, made sure someone brought water, and made sure no one wandered alone after sundown. That was the kind of courage that lasts, the kind that shows up after the gun smoke, when the crowd goes quiet. Josie finally stepped into the open, where everyone could see her face. No sack, no rope, no shame hanging from her neck. She lifted her chin and she told the truth in a steady voice. The town listened, because they had to. Caldwell was taken into custody, not by some hero from far away, but by the same neighbors he had used like tools. Halverson kept that little notebook in his coat, held tight like a man protecting a newborn. The doctor stayed inside his clinic, door locked, because even he knew the air had changed. And Wyatt, the mountain man they invented, stood in the middle of it all, wounded and tired, but unbroken. Now let me step in here, just me and you for a minute. I've read a lot of stories like this, and I'll tell you something I don't say lightly. Most evil doesn't walk in wearing horns. It walks in wearing a clean collar, and it speaks in a calm voice, and it tells frightened people what they already want to believe. I've seen it happen in old towns, and I've seen it happen in modern ones too, and I bet you have. If you've lived long enough to get a few scars you didn't ask for. I also know this. Fear is loud, but it's not smart. Fear makes good folks do lazy things, and then call it righteousness. Fear makes a crowd feel brave, right up until the moment the truth shows up with a face and a pair of raw wrists. Wyatt could have stayed on that hill, kept his cabin quiet, kept his pain private, and let the town rot in its own lies. Plenty of men would have. No shame in wanting peace when you've been burned before, but he didn't. He walked down anyway. He chose to be seen, and that is the hard part for a lot of us. Not the fighting, not the running, the being seen, because when you step into the open, people don't just see your good, they see your history. They see the rumors they already wrote about you. They see the parts of you that never healed right. So here's the lesson I take from that hot hillside and that burned church. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is one simple act of decency, done in front of people who expect cruelty. Wyatt took the sack off. He gave water. He stood between a scared girl and a loaded gun. He didn't ask for a reward, and he didn't demand a thank you. He just did the right thing because it was right. And Josie has her own lesson, too. She didn't become brave all at once. She became brave one choice at a time. She chose to walk down the hill. She chose to stand in the street. She chose to tell the truth, even when it cost her comfort. That's how real strength works. It's not a single big moment. It's a chain of smaller moments, linked together by stubborn hope. Now ask yourself something, and answer it honestly. Who in your life benefits when you stay silent? Who gets paid when you doubt your own memory? Who feels safer when you shrink? And what would change if you took the sack off your own face and told the truth in plain daylight? Silverton had to learn that a town can't pray its way out of a problem it profits from. It has to repent with action. It has to protect the weak with hands, not words. It has to stop calling cruelty tradition and start calling courage what it is. Wyatt looked at the town one last time before he headed back toward the mountain. He didn't forgive them with a speech. He didn't punish them with a lecture. He simply left them with the truth. And the truth is a hard thing to live with. Josie watched him go, and she understood something that will stay with her for the rest of her life. A monster isn't always the mass in the woods. Sometimes it's the lie you let live in your own house. If this story hit you somewhere real, if it reminded you of a time you were judged wrong, or a time you stayed quiet when you should have spoken, tap like so more folks can find it. And if you want more stories like this, stories that carry a lesson you can actually use, go ahead and subscribe. And stay with me on this trail. And I want to hear from you. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you listening from? And one more question. The kind that sticks around after the screen goes dark. If you had been on that hill, with boots coming up the path, would you have stayed hidden, or would you have walked down and faced the town anyway?